Alrighty, so we're live, and let's do some quick introduction as to what's happening in this stream. So I do a happiness class based on Islamic principles, and I want people who I told Claire and maybe Zarina as well that I'm actually trying to get less views. That might sound a bit crazy, but I'm really interested in just a few people who want to change their life, not getting loads of views from loads of people who just want to make noise on the internet. It's very boring. I actually want to make a difference. So that's another thing. And I sometimes feel like I should explain something else about my happiness class, because some people might say, what's the point of these happiness classes when there's so many big problems in the world, like there's Palestine, there's people dying, and you're talking about your selfish happiness. And I think this topic today might explain something, which is really, if you don't have, I'll go into a bit more detail in a bit, but if you don't have the building blocks of if you are not happy yourself, you are like the building blocks that builds up a happier society. And we can have corrupt governments only because we've got so much corruption inside our own countries. And just to point out, just a thought before I introduce everybody else, is how is it possible we have democracy and we have all these wonderful people in the country, yet we only elect these murderous people who are willing to commit genocide, and not just in Palestine, but all over the world? So that's just maybe a bit of too long of an introduction. So my name's Khaled Safir. I'm a Muslim. I do happiness classes. We've got Claire, who's a secular Quranist. That means, should I do everybody introduce themselves?
Yes, yes,
Sorry, I've been
you
talking too
introduced
long.
me, and it was
Yeah.
particularly objectionable. I'll stop you.
All right. Okay. So Claire, a secular Quranist, but what that basically means is somebody who's not a Muslim but likes the laws of Islam, the Quran's laws. So the Quran is the guidebook for Muslims and actually all of humanity, if anybody wants to follow it. And so that's a really interesting perspective. Islam is gaining a lot of popularity amongst a lot of different people. So, Claire, you all right with that introduction?
Yes, no objections. Thank you for summing
Cool.
me up.
All right. Zarina, so what's your introduction? So, the first thing that comes to mind is that when I talked to you, I don't know how many months ago, maybe 6 months ago, you described yourself as an Islamophobe, and I think your opinions have changed on Islam a bit. I would say quite a lot, really. I don't think you hate Islam, but like you did originally. I think maybe you've seen a different side to Islam that you like, and I always felt, let me just put it this way, that your ideas were Islamic, but you were put off by certain Muslims. Maybe that's a short way of saying it. How would you describe it?
Yes, hello everybody. It's nice to be on Khaled's channel. I always really enjoy talking to Khaled and Claire. So I would describe myself as spiritual, and I want to make this very clear. My views on Islam haven't actually changed that much. I was never an Islamophobe. I have never hated Islam per se. I have been very much vehemently against the Islamification of the West, as in the rise of, we'll say, Islamic extremism and Islamic fundamentalism, which effectively promotes a doctrine of hatred and violence. So if you want to make it more specific, what I'm really against is the eradication of a native population and a native culture, i.e. the indigenous English population and indigenous Westerners. I'm against the use of religion as a form of ideological warfare. I'm against the use of religion as a political weapon, as a form of dogma and political control. And yes, I have had the privilege of seeing a positive side to Islam via you, Khaled, but I would say that overall my views are really quite the same, really. And I don't think the issue is necessarily Islam or this or that. It's really about religion being used as a form of political control, as a way to wipe out pre-existing beliefs, as a way to strike fear into people's hearts, as opposed to religion being used as a tool for love and peace and harmony. So, anyone who wants to accuse me of being an Islamophobe, I think Islamophobe is the wrong term. I would say that I'm against religious extremism and religious fundamentalism. And I've seen this largely in the Abrahamic religions, which I believe have been used heavily as a weapon, especially over the last few thousand years, Christianity and Islam especially. And that's really my stance, really. I wouldn't say that I don't hate Muslims. I don't have anything against Muslims. There are a lot of things I dislike about, maybe not even Islam, but perhaps about the Islamic culture. But again, there's a lot of things I think are very nice. I think are very nice about religion as a whole. So, and I think Islamophobe really is quite a stupid term. I think it's just a term that's used to gaslight people in the same way that terms like misogynist and homophobe, I think all these terms are used to just gaslight people and stop people from having opinions and give the wrong impression about people.
Okay, cool. All right. So let's jump into the main topic, which is, where do good leaders come from, or how can we get good leaders? So these are some of the essential problems we have to fix if we want to be happy. People are pretty angry a lot of the time that why do we have all these terrible leaders who seem to be against us, who are, raising taxes for poor people, killing people abroad, and all that kind of stuff. What I'm going to suggest is pretty much the opposite of what most of Western society believes. They believe that there are these evil people at the top and everybody else is nice. And I'm going to say that cannot be right. There's a saying of Prophet Muhammad said, your leaders will be as you deserve. And if you think about it, where do leaders come from? They're not from space. They're not aliens. They come from our societies. And on top of that, we vote for them. So there must be something really wrong that all these millions of people in the country cannot vote for decent human beings who don't go around murdering other people and stealing money and all these other terrible things that all our politicians, not just in England, all over the West for some reason, keep doing. And just to give you an idea of, or at least some hope possibly, of change and the reality of what I'm saying, this sort of grassroots, let's say, revolution, is, if you think about it, as Muslims are increasing in number in England, and whatever reason they're increasing, well, it's the fastest growing religion in the world, most kids, etc. So are the number of Muslims in Parliament. They might not necessarily at this moment in time fully represent Islamic ideas. They're still really corrupt, but you can see there's a change. And so how did that change happen? Was it a violent revolution? Not really. It's just that, in short, Muslims stuck to some sort of principles. They're not perfect, far from it, okay, but they had some principles better than most other people, enough for them to maintain healthy relationships in terms of marriage, therefore have children. And there's a slow and silent revolution that's making the change. People don't like that because people want to protest for one day and they want the world to change, and nothing changes like that. So should we go clockwise? And I want to hear what people think. So Claire, what do you think about that idea? And do you have any alternative ideas?
I suppose I was thinking of Pakistan when you were talking, because you were saying the more Muslims, and then before that, Zarina was talking about Islamophobia. And I guess people would be saying, well, Pakistan ain't that great, so what's wrong with them? And I guess my answer would be hypocrisy. I mean, that's my kind of latest thing, in that all these Muslims in Pakistan pretending to be Muslim and, believing in the laws, but not actually obeying them and not following them. And maybe the rulers and the ruled take this corrupt attitude. and that's why things aren't working. I mean, there's no point saying you're going to, follow a book and actually not follow it, and then blame the book for, you not following it.
I think it's that simple, isn't it? Corruption is corruption. Even if you give yourself the label of a Muslim, you're still corrupt, and then you're going to get corrupt leaders, and they have some of the most corrupt leaders in the world. So, okay, cool. Do you have any? So do you agree? I suppose you're agreeing with what I'm saying. Do you have any sort of alternative ideas, Claire?
Well, I was talking to Vincent Bruno, whom we both know, and I have this little idea of a circle of virtue, whereby, for example, in the circle, we all agree that we're, honest and reasonable people, as well as principled, and then we kind of want to widen the circle of virtue as being people who can talk about, ideas and politics honestly and reasonably, and are bounded by principle. And I think if we can, I guess it's a bit like peer review. So you get people say, oh yes, Khaled, he's all right. He'll listen to you. He won't tell lies about you and impugn your motives, just because he doesn't agree with you, etc. So I think we can, by starting these little groups, kind of make it a point that people should at least be honest when they're discussing politics, and be logical when they try and solve problems.
So it sounds like you're trying to you're saying have groups of honest people and try to grow them in size and time. Is that sort of right?
Yes. So there'd be a kind of endorsement, like, well, who thinks you're reasonable and honest, and I could say, well, if we are this, but Khaled, Zarina, they think I'm all right, and then and Zarina can say the same thing about Khaled and Claire, and that sort of idea, and then you can widen it to I'm in with this group that doesn't supposed to be so honest and reasonable. We can discuss politics with them, and we're going to shun this lot who are crazy and believe in nonsense and tell lies about you.
Sure. I mean, I'm all for spreading kind of the circles of goodness, let's say. But I would try not to shun people. Like I would say, okay, in Islam, you've got a first responsibility to your neighbor, after your family, to your neighbors. And so if you start working on your neighbors, in Islam, your neighbors are 40 people in front of you, to your right, to your left, etc., and to behind you. So it's quite essentially your neighborhood or your community. If you can work on them, only then can we start having any hope of changing government. Actually, maybe I'll come back to that. No, I'll mention it quickly now. If you want a better government, then our essential problem right now is we're so corrupt and selfish that we don't even know our neighbors. So we don't even form communities. And if we can't form communities and we can't get together, therefore there's no hope to get together and choose a better government. Right now, we're just individuals in our houses manipulated by what's on TV. So that's just probably another problem that I'll probably get into about the problem with democracy at the moment. So Zarina, what are your thoughts about I suppose my idea, which is roughly a slow grassroots revolution of goodness? That's the only way we're going to have good leaders.
Well, what, sorry, Khaled?
So my idea, okay, let me put it this way. My idea is the reason why we have corrupt leaders is because we're corrupt ourselves, and we have to accept that because our leaders come from among us.
No, I disagree with that. I think that politics in general is a very corrupt business because the scope of modern politics is effectively founded on lies and deceit. And we don't really live in a democracy. What we live in really is a system in which there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of, bureaucracy with the way effectively the whole, I mean, we can't go into all of it because it's far too deep. But we just look at, say, the UK, for example. This is supposed to be a democratic society, yeah. It's not prioritizing the native people of this country. The government has, for the last, I don't know how many, year and a half or 2 years, whatever, been sending money out to the Ukrainians. I mean, it's not really gone to the Ukrainians, but effectively to fund this proxy war that's where most of the money has gone instead of being used to support the people here. And in the UK, I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but I know that there's obviously a lot of poverty, homelessness. A lot of people in the UK are very unhappy about certain buildings being destroyed, about their culture and history being eradicated. And I know this because I've spoken to a lot of my English friends about this. And I think that I've really seen a lot of the hatred against Islam comes from a lot of English people, a lot of white English people, and I think that I can completely see where they're coming from. I think that I can see why they'd be more antagonistic against Islam, because it's our sense of this is our country, and we've got these people who are sort of coming and wanting to say, get rid of our history, get rid of our lineage. I know this is a big topic at Speaker's Corner as well, and especially with a lot of the Christians. But if we just remove religion from the equation, it seems more to do with this idea of this is our country, and we don't want somebody else coming in sort of trying to remove our traditions, our history, and the like. So I think that the whole problem of electing corrupt leaders, it's not so much that the people are electing them, it's more that the whole system has been set up so that instead of politicians wanting to prioritize their people and their nation, there were amazing politicians, people like JFK, who genuinely did care about their people, who were unfortunately assassinated. But in this society or this time period, we seem to have a lot of this corruption. I think that's just because the whole system itself is corrupt, and because it's
is there any way of getting good leaders then? Because
I think the way to get good leaders would be for people to, instead of maybe people going through the party system, perhaps people going from a different route, like say, for example, I don't know, selecting people who are, say, in their community, and instead of people trying to say join a party like Labour or Tory, which are all corrupt, sort of going a different route. I wonder if that might solve the problem of leadership, because revolution, I mean, I don't like to use the word revolution, but we'll say evolution, for want of a better term. Political evolutions, socio-political evolutions usually happen through the arousal of new ideas. I mean, what we're discussing here is really political philosophy, and the whole regeneration and reshift of power. And that happens usually from citizens who have new ideas. Like, for example, me as an anti-feminist, this idea of having a new women's philosophy sort of, starting to shift the power away from the feminists. It's all that whole thing of like, it always comes from the individuals on the bottom. And then that's how you end up with new positions. But I guess the real question, which the Greeks would ask, is how do you avoid having corrupt leaders?
Oh, okay. So the leaders came from somewhere, right? And all these years, and not just in England, but all over the West, we have deeply corrupt leaders who've been killing people all around the world, right? How is it possible that if we're really that good as a society, that we cannot elect good people? Like, I mean, you don't have to be part of the Conservative Party or something to be. You can be I can't remember. So how is it possible that if we were actually genuinely good people as a society in the West, and I'm in Jordan at the moment, generally still talk as if I'm in the West still, but can you see there's a bit of a problem with this idea that if we're all like, there's millions of good people and there's just like 0.0001% are the bad people and they happen to be the leaders. How is it possible that we can't say, Joe, who's actually a good person, we're all going to vote for him? How come we can't organize ourselves to do that? My argument is that we are really selfish people, and there's lots of evidence to prove that, which is that people are lonely in London and they don't know their neighbors, and that's because we're so selfish that we don't bother with that, and so we can't even form societies because we're selfish and corrupt. That's my thought. What do you think about that? That's the true reason why we can't pick a good, decent government, Zarina. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I think it's, again, not because people are evil or good. I think a lot of it as well comes from people having rectified their negative qualities with their positive qualities. I think that actually, when we try and say people are all good or people are all bad, that's actually a big problem. Instead, we should be realistic and say, no, there's good and bad in everybody. I think that a lot of it is because maybe people are very ignorant about politics. A lot of people are not really that interested, especially I know women are statistically less interested in politics than men, which is why historically voting was only reserved for men, something I've repeatedly brought up. A lot of people say, oh, it's because of sexism. No, it's actually because politics is typically more of a male arena. And I guess our failure to get good leaders again, I just think it comes back to the way the whole system is set up. I don't think it's because people are bad. I think it's also because a lot of people people don't really learn about politics in school, do they? We're not taught about a political system. We're not taught about how a country should be run. It's like all the philosophical questions that people should be.
Okay, let's say they knew. I mean, I don't want to. I'm going to go going around in circles in a minute, but if they knew, what is it that they could possibly know about the political system that, like, let's say 99% of people were really good people, let's just say, right? So we should be able to pick somebody from the 99%, right? What is it that we need to know about the political system that would change it so we get good leaders?
I guess what do we need to know more about the system? Well, how it works, really. Like how does the democratic system work? Like how does the parliamentary system itself work? I mean, where do the votes go? Who casts the votes? Who decides who gets to be in power? I mean, it's like every 5 years the leadership changes as well.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, most people seem to know enough. I don't think there's anyway. We'll keep going round. So I like Claire's been commenting. So we had. Is it John Vance? Is that him? He's JB Vance, but he's given himself the name John Vance Claire, who's saying the elite are out to create an apocalypse, and you're responding by why not try to fix the apocalypse? Is that right, Claire? Am I getting? Yeah, prevent it. Yeah. So is it the same John Vance from Canada?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Yeah. I think it's better to try to fix it rather than just complain that the world's a terrible place. And even if the leaders are out to destroy us, how about if we're the majority, shouldn't we be able to do something about it? I suppose is the obvious logic. Yeah, and so and then he pointed out that we should be more truthful. We're in a post-truth society. Do you want to explain that a bit? Because I do feel, I say, if there's a disease that comes from somewhere, and the disease is in society, and there's plenty of evidence that there is a disease. It's called individualism. So I agree that we're in somewhat a post-truth society, if you want to describe it. But what do you mean by post-truth society, and why do you describe society like that at the moment?
A post-truth society is a society in which people say, well, what you say may be true, but who cares? Your arguments might be sound, but who cares? Who is moved by truth and logic? And they're basically saying, no, you have to be popular. You have to pander to stupid people. You have to bribe them or threaten them, but you can't just appeal to their reason or their sense of truth. People have kind of given up on it now. You don't get you don't get to win your argument if you say it's true. The person has to like it, and then you win, maybe.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So it means you have to lie to them, or you have to bribe them, or you have to threaten them, and nobody cares. They'll say, "Oh, but what do you expect? It's the way of the world."
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Most people don't care enough. They're more concerned with their own problems, sort of thing, to care about truth or what's the right thing to do, etc. I am going to quickly share the document I always put for all of my live streams. So for every live stream I do, I have a document which summarizes the ideas and references from the Quran. So I'm going to quickly show that. So do check out in the description two links. One to my whole happiness course with all the summaries and references to all the classes I'll be doing. I've somehow skipped to lesson 5 and missed out, 2, 3, and 4 or whatever. But anyway, or maybe something like that. But let me quickly whiz through some of the other ideas. So first of all, I've already argued, and I don't want to go around in circles, that if there's corruption at the top, there is therefore corruption in the whole of society. It doesn't come from anywhere. Corrupt leaders actually take advantage of the weakness of society. So you have to, the only way if you've got a corrupt society, is a society where it doesn't work together and people can be played against each other. So that's one argument I've already given. And another argument that is about division. So a lot of people think protests. Protests can be good generally, but unfortunately, it's usually one group against another. So, I mean, there's the Palestinian protests. Maybe that's a little bit different. It's not like a lot of the pro-Palestinians are against, let's say, Jews or something. They're just against any bad activity. But even that, I don't think is particularly effective. So generally, okay, so 2 points I'm going to make. First of all, a lot of protests, let's say the green protests where they're sitting in the middle of the streets or something, they're usually against one group or another. They're not trying to fight, they're not trying to create unity. And unity is a really hard thing to do. I think my point really is that most people want really quick solutions, and they go to scapegoating. They say, it's his fault, it's his fault. And if that person fixed themselves, then all the world's problems will fix. But unfortunately, they don't seem to realize that everybody is part of society. And if you don't bring everybody along and you keep saying, you're rubbish, you're rubbish, you're rubbish, that's not really gonna, that might make you feel good in the short term, but it's not going to make things better. And the reality is we have to do the slow, hard work of bringing people together. So unity rather than discord. And also, yeah, I've already said it, I suppose, that things you can't flick your fingers and expect the world to change. And then I briefly mentioned democracy. This is the last point I'm going to make. The problem with democracy, the problem with democracy, as the Quran says, the majority, the Quran says, if you obey the majority on the earth, they will lead you away from God's way. So we'd like to think in our minds that if you ask the majority, they will think of something sensible or come with sensible solutions. But that's actually against fundamental ideas in psychology, which is things like Pareto's principles or Price's law, which is pretty uncomfortable reading, but basically it says that most people are not very effective. Okay, so I don't want to get too mathematical. It's something like 50%. What was it? 50. The square root of the square root of people do 50% of the work. Basically, it's always a minority that do most, are the most effective, and most people are used really not that effective or even useless in a company. So say you've got 100 people in a company, the bigger the number of people in a company, the more useless people are. So the greater percentage of useless people there are, because they feel they can get away with it. And so if you have a country, you've got loads of people who, when they vote, they don't take their vote really seriously. They don't contemplate. They don't understand what's going on. And you're going to have a lot of people who are ill-equipped to even vote. So it's not surprising at all that democracy is not going to work. The only way you could have possibly any improvement is you have masses of people who are essentially good people, who vote for more good people. Anyway, done a lot of talking. So if I want to summarize, and I'll ask Serena, because I think Claire just said a few things. So one thing I'll say is I'm against protesting generally. Just to circle back and ask you a question, Serena. I'm against protesting because it's about blaming, one, and it's about short-term thinking rather than doing the hard graft of building a better society. What do you think about that, Serena?
Can you repeat the question, please?
So, okay, so the overall thing we're trying to achieve is a better government, better leaders, right? And people think a shortcut to getting better leaders or making leaders listen to you is protesting. And I'm saying I'm against protesting, generally speaking, right? Because it's short-term thinking. It's like, oh, I'm going to get my placard out and I'm going to solve a problem. Like what's happening in Palestine didn't happen yesterday. These Western genocidal governments didn't come from nowhere. We elected them. So I'm probably talking too long. So my question to you is, am I right in saying protesting is short-term thinking to a long-term problem?
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I mean, I've never really been one for protests. I did go on one march like a while back just because it was in London, but yeah, I kind of agree that protesting isn't really the most efficient way of solving problems. I mean, yes, the issue with Palestine is very serious. It has been for a long time, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a politician, but I suppose regarding these kind of issues, definitely avoiding the corruption and the bureaucracy and such, that's definitely point to make. Cool.
Okay. And what do you think about this idea? The problem with democracy is that there's this thing called Price's Law, which essentially says that it's always a minority who are the most useful people in any particular endeavor. Like if you get a company, it'll be like, I don't want to get too mathematical, but it's always a very small minority that does most of the work, and the other people are kind of dragged along and they're not particularly useful. And the bigger the company, the more people who think they can get away with not doing much good. And there's a lot of studies that show that. Like there's 50% of the people are actively working against the company they're in. I've seen that all the time, right? It sounds really crazy, but it's kind of a reality. So that if you call a government or a country a company, it's an organization, and then you have the average person voting, do you see that democracy can be a problem because you've got people who don't care and they're going to vote badly and they're ill-informed?
Well, yeah, I mean, I believe actually in ancient Greece they discussed this as well, the problem, because they had what's known as a radical democracy, didn't they, where it was, instead of having elected officials, it was all of the people were able to make demographic decisions. And I think that part of the problem with that comes from when we have societies with too many people, and maybe this comes back to the fact that there's simply a population overload. Like, especially in the UK, we have a lot of people in the West, rather. We have a lot of people concentrated in large cities. And this means that instead of there being, say, small provinces where it's much easier to make democratic decisions, even, we've got these large cities where we have all these people living together in one city, and that means that there isn't a community feel. It's not democratic, because how can you have a society which is, say, how can you so for example, London is what 10 million people. How on earth can you possibly have systems in place that are there to take care of the needs of 10 million people? Like, that is a lot. And I really think that having people living in small provinces, I suppose that's why we have the boroughs in London, is much better. I mean, historically, London and big cities as well, they were for trading, weren't they? They were for trading, they were for merchants and all that. They weren't really for residents. So that's really an issue, I think. I think the big problem is when you have, too many people in one place, as opposed to, say, small local communities. And there's definitely something to be said as well for people living in small local communities and having like their elected representative, almost like, say, people living in small tribes and having like a chief or something. Like, this is sort of seems to be much more in tune with the way humans are, instead of trying to have 10 million people and then one mayor trying to meet the needs of 10 million people, especially when we don't have a culturally homogenous city. London is a multicultural city. There isn't really a shared culture. There's no shared religion. There's no shared values. You've got this woke, we've got this rainbow agenda, we've got feminism, we've got too much of a mix of different socio-political groups and socio-cultural groups in London. So that lack of unity and that lack of cohesion definitely does make a big problem.
Interesting. Okay. So Claire, you often talk about this idea of I'm trying to maybe think of not just the few things I've said here, but you say a lot that we do need a religion or religious ideas that can unite people. What do you think? Is that a way of getting better government if we could get united behind something? I mean, what do you think about that, Claire?
Well, I think people will think they have better government if they feel they get justice. And you can't get justice if you don't have truth. If you convict an innocent man, that's not justice. If you let a guilty man go, you're not giving justice. So your laws have to be, the ones that give justice. And I don't think it's that hard to decide that patriarchy gives more justice than matriarchy. But maybe it is. Maybe people don't even know what I mean by matriarchy or want to destroy patriarchy. I mean, this is what feminists want to do. They want to destroy the patriarchy, which is to undermine the practice of marriage, which our governments no longer support.
If I may interject, I know exactly what Claire means by when she says that. She means that because as well, I mean, me and Claire have discussed this privately. Patriarchy is a Marxist concept, and there's no patriarchy in the feminist conception in the West. What it actually is that feminists are trying to destroy the role of men, and societies, as rightly said, thrive best when most of the political positions are held by men. Good men. I mean, this is going back to very kind of, Marcus Aurelius-esque kind of ideals, when good men, virtuous men, men of valor, men of, good conduct, etc., are the ones who hold the political positions of power, societies flourish much better. And I think that, I remember talking about this with Lady at Speaker's Corner as well. If, say, the political system, voting, politics, if all of that is fundamentally held by men, the private sector, so the domestic sector, the focus on family life and all that such, that was really held by women. And one could actually say, I think I discussed this with Professor Fiamenko as well. I know Simon Webb touches on this in the Suffragette Bombers, that a lot of the problems facing the modern West, and this is going to sound very controversial, could come from giving women the vote, because before women in the UK got the vote, women were kept out of politics, but they still had a very big role in society. There were a lot of women active in teaching, active in nursing. A lot of women had their place. Maybe this is part of a problem. Maybe when you try and involve too many women in politics, this actually brings a problem, because, again, to go back to what I said earlier, and obviously Claire mentioned this as well, politics is really a very masculine activity. It's really a very male activity. And ever since the advent of the feminist movement, I discussed this recently with Nick Buckley on his channel, more and more policies are more and more favoring women. We no longer live in what I would describe as a gynocracy. I don't want to say matriarchy because that's a very inaccurate term. We live in a gynocracy in the sense that our societies
are
prioritizing. We don't live in because matriarchy would imply that our political systems and positions of political power are held by women, but most of the society power are held by men. It's just that men are creating policies that are largely pandering to women, and it's like our society has become so feminized and so gynocentric as a result of all of these policies which are being passed.
Gynocentric, maybe I'm stupid, but can you
gynocentric means favoring women over men. That's really what feminism is. It's the favoritism and the prioritization of one sex over the other, and that's very dangerous, because prior to feminism, societies was more about men, women, family, children, whereas now it's as if we're just pandering to women so much, and this has been happening ever since 1848 with the bloody fucking Geneva Convention, and ever since we're having, it's too much now. And because, again, women are more emotional, women are less rational than men by default, not saying that women can't make decisions, but because society is favoriting women over men, we're prioritizing feelings over logic, and politics cannot be a game of feelings. feelings are very good for art, for nursing, for children, but for things like politics, for things like, making very necessary decisions, it's much easier and much healthier to have those positions held by men, because men are typically much better at being the ones who are able to make those decisions, because women typically get more irrational, they get more emotional, they get more wound up, they get more stressed. I think that this is a problem with all this girl boss and like a girl stuff. It's too much of a favoritism of women. I mean, this is really why my whole message has been feminism is trash, because I think that ultimately we're really negating that fundamental difference between men and women. I think that a big problem right now with Western politics is because we're so much prioritizing women over men, we've forgotten actually that we really should be thinking about how do societies function. And that's when we have men of high good statures, good moral character, when we have social cohesion, when we have cultural cohesion, when we have things like shared values, and we have none of that, especially not in the West, especially not in England. That's really why England.
Okay, so this, I think something Claire would say, and I'm going to say we probably agree on this. The reason why you call it gynocentric, Claire calls it matriarchy. We can talk about terms in a bit. Is that, well, I think me and Claire would probably agree, and maybe Claire, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Is that when you've got a fundamental breakdown of society of morals, we pander to, let's say, I think maybe Claire can explain it slightly better, but basically, what are men doing at the moment? What weak, immoral men doing at the moment? They're saying they'll agree with anything a woman would say so they can have sex, basically. Right, so their moral values go down, and so that brings me back to this thing where if you don't have moral values, all sorts of problems happen. And there is a lot of evidence, actually. I'll probably give an argument in a slightly different way, that patriarchy is the natural and most functional way. I was watching a video the other day where they were saying logically, well, first of all, why are we having a breakdown in societies? Because we're trying to treat men and women the same. Okay, if men and women are treated the same, then women they're going to have children. If they have to have children for society to continue, yet they have to go out and work at the same time. It doesn't work. You can't have both. So things naturally work better if you have a patriarchy. Essentially means you've got a man in charge of the family, and he goes out and works, but he's not a dictator. That's all. He's just
perhaps instead of using the term patriarchy, because I know a lot of feminists will jump at us for using that term, we could use the term, say, as paternal, or a society where the male role is in charge. Because again, the patriarchy, when you say patriarchy, feminists, the definition of patriarchy, as per the feminist definition, is a system where men oppress women, and that's a really big corruption. That's a Marxist invention. So patriarchy in its Marxist form doesn't exist, a feminist conception. What we could instead say is, say, societies which are paternal or patrilineal. Even patrilineal might be a good use.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe I'm wording things badly. Maybe Claire can explain it better. About the reason why maybe we have I mean, I'll ask you two questions, Claire. What do you think about this? What do you call it, Serena? What?
Gynocracy. Well, because Claire and I went to a talk recently, and I think that gynocracy is the best term I would use to describe the Western political system. If anybody's watching, you should read the book The Feminist Lie, which lists all of the problems which men are. Feminist Lie, or Nick Buckley's book. I forgot the name of it. He published it recently. But all of the modern problems facing men in the West right now, and women as well, are because we live in a gynocracy, or a gynocentric society. Yeah.
Okay, so Claire, what do you think about that we're living in a gynocracy rather than a matriarchy, one thing? And would you say corruption leads to matriarchy, gynocracy, whatever? And maybe therefore my initial hypothesis is if you have corruption, you're going to have bad government, bad leaders. Maybe there's too many things there. Maybe just
Okay,
what do you think about China?
I'll
Go
try
on,
and
go for it.
remember your
Yeah.
questions and try and answer
Okay.
them one by
Yeah.
one.
Sure.
I prefer matriarchy because it describes how a society is run. And as for whether we are or aren't a gynocracy, I think even in a patriarchy, men do value women in the sense that they know that to rise in status against other men, you have to have a wife. To be a leader of other men, you have to have a wife. Because in a patriarchy, you would have to at least have a wife and children to be able to presume to lead other men. And that was used to be a very strict rule, such as the president of America would be a married father. You can't just sort of be a bachelor and be the president of America. Or there
Well,
might have been occasions, but it was a very bad experiment.
okay.
And
Okay, that's interesting.
because I talked to
Yeah.
Vincent, who has this idea that he wants to create an all gay male society, and I said, how are you going to choose? How are you going to choose the best gay male leader if you're all going to be men? How are you going to choose it?
So are you saying a married man is more, I don't know, better as a leader than a bachelor? And if so, why?
Yes, because if you're all
Most presidents and prime ministers are married. Yeah, I've noticed that as well. Because people take you more seriously if you're married.
Yeah, because I mean, you wouldn't want somebody who can't even find a wife to be your leader. And then it's like, well, it's
Right.
not enough for him to be married. He's got to have good children. Are his children delinquents and criminals? And so you have to wait
Right.
for a man with grown-up children who haven't disgraced him. It's like, are his children okay? Because if there are, maybe he might be, all right as a leader. But if he
Right.
can't even find another man, or if he's gay, we're not going to make him our leader because that would be
Sure.
crazy.
Okay, so basic leadership qualities start in the family. Okay, and the second question is, do you think a matriarchy is a reflection of corruption in society?
Yes, because a matriarch. Okay, the perfect patriarchy would be 100% married parents, and therefore the perfect matriarchy would be 100% unmarried parents. And if you look at these two societies at their most extreme, you can easily imagine that the patriarchy would easily beat the matriarchy. And I think that was basically how the Neanderthals became extinct, because when Homo sapiens discovered the practice of marriage, they just became, just more organized and were easily, I know this is controversial and people will ask, for evidence, but I think it is this sort of new idea of organizing how, who we can and can't have sex with, that gives us the hierarchy that is necessary for orders to be followed and given, and who is entitled to have children, who is entitled to give orders. And then you think of the military organization, the armed forces. I mean, obviously, if we're all equal, we won't have much of an army, because if somebody says go and attack that fortress there, somebody will say, no, you go and do it. Why should we get killed following your orders? You do it then. And there will be no hierarchy and no agreement and no focused action that will be effective, and people will just attack us, and then we'll just die because we can't cooperate with each other to even agree on the right thing to do. And that's what
Claire, perhaps instead of saying patriarch versus patriarchy, it's more monogamy versus polyamory. Because I remember saying this on Paul's show as well. It was actually Dimitri mentioned this, that societies where monogamy is prioritized are more stable than societies where you have polyamory or polyandry or whatever. And that's something they say in Islam as well, Khaled, that, or most religions really, that people should, it's the prioritize, because when you have man, woman married, and I'm not against homosexual marriage for anyone who's watching as well. I don't think gay marriage is a bad thing, but effectively when you have societies that prioritize married people over people being single, or people just being in like laissez-faire relationships, that's where you get more of the stability. And I suppose perhaps instead of saying because the problem as well is that if we say we live in a matriarchy, feminists will turn around and say, well, no, we don't, because most of the political positions are held by men. And people frequently bring that up. They'll say, oh, no, most of the leaders are men, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, we live in a patriarchy. So that's why I say, okay, we might live in a patriarchal world, but the systems are creating systems which are favoriting women over men, and really you could say single women. They're not prioritizing marriage. I mean, that's what Phyllis Schlafly was protesting against, really. She was saying that's why she was against the Equal Rights Amendment, because she was saying that all of the systems and the things that are being created, the problem is that instead of the prioritization of married couples, of children, families, and older people, it's now all shifting to only prioritize a small group of people, which is largely single women in academia, really. And if we look at a lot of the woke, a lot of the trans, who is it? It's unmarried people who don't want children. It's these single people, gender confused people. They're the ones who are being favorited in the West, which is quite messed up, really.
Well, yes, because if you want to encourage people to be married parents, you have to privilege them over non-parents. It's only, forget the justice of it. If you want to encourage certain behavior, you have to reward it. And if you want to punish certain behavior, you have to punish it. It really is as simple as that.
I had a thought actually that maybe we shouldn't. Okay, this is going to sound really controversial. I brought this up with someone as well, and please don't misinterpret what I'm about to say. But imagine if voting was not allowed, if married women were not given the right to vote, and not because saying that married women shouldn't vote, but because if, say, voting was prioritized, so when a man gets married, his vote is counted for the whole family, because that would probably take some of the pressure off women, and perhaps that would, I mean, one might say that might remove the incentive for women to marry, but actually, because again, women are less interested in politics than men, if women, say, knew they were going to be married and their husband could just take care of because also as well, if a husband would probably say, oh, wife, who should we vote for? Do we agree? It's like, why do we both have to vote? It's like, why would you vote for someone different from your husband anyway? Why can't your husband just say, okay, I'll tick the box and it counts for both me and her? You know what I'm saying? It's just an idea.
Well, the thing is, if most men were married fathers, they would be living with their wives who would want to protect the interests of their provider and protector. Yes. So they would vote, as their husband wishes. But if they're all living separately, then they would have separate and conflicting interests. If all the men were living, in a different household, and the men and women hate each other, that they would be, wanting different laws and a different.
Was the original Greek idea of democracy? Wasn't it that there was a very small minority of people who voted? Was it landowners or something? I can't remember the rule. Do you remember, anybody? I could Google
something like that. Married men only being allowed to vote, or landowners, or something like that.
Landowners isn't good because that obviously harms the working class. But I can see there being something said for, say, married men having priority regardless of class and income status.
Okay, I mean, why do you say married men having a priority? I mean, do you agree with
To link with what Claire's saying, because if married men are given priority, and again, I want to stress married men regardless of income status, because the problem as well with voting, especially in England, was that it was the prioritization of the wealthy, and regardless of class, because what that does is it means that, first of all, it gives incentive for men to get married and stay married, and it also means that, the male role of authority is taken more seriously. And it also as well helps women out, because it means that, again, instead of a woman having the burden, because also, again, it's like, because I remember, Pearl was saying women shouldn't vote, and I think she's not the best at explaining her points, but effectively, if, say, I'm not saying women shouldn't vote, what I'm actually saying is that if a woman is married, if she and her husband, why would you want to vote for someone different to your husband? Like you would say both make the decisions. It's almost like his vote isn't just for him, it's for him, his wife, and the family, but he's the one who casts the box. And again, it gives that power back to the man, but it's not about taking the power away from the woman. It's about restoring that sense of male authority and male leadership, while also taking your wife's views into consideration, especially if you're married to an intelligent woman. She might say, oh, perhaps we could go for this person, that person, that person. And he's like, okay, hon, and then, it's an idea, really. But that would definitely enter stay married for sure.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, firstly, we need to improve the quality of the people who vote. Like, people who are most well informed are also responsible people, right? So it does make sense. Like, if you're a married person, you've shown some sense of responsibility. But also, I do agree. Like, and probably not popular thing to say, but I think people are realizing it. So women are not interested in large scale things, politics largely. It's men who have. If you look at how who builds the world, as it were, it's the industries and things. They like thinking big, large scale, and women like taking care of details relatively, right? Doesn't mean one's better than the other. It's just that some people are better at certain things, and women, and some people are
Meritocratic.
there are other things, right? And we need both. And uh, men are generally, let's say, unemotional and see things in the big picture and things like that, and are more logical. And doesn't make them better as human beings. It just gives them a different role, I suppose. So it does make sense. I would say that. Yeah, makes sense that men probably should vote, I think. And it's interesting that there's a is there a bit is there a
So that would
movement
also,
before
yeah,
before
that would
she started
prioritize. That would stop men from also being single and probably stop like deadbeat fathers as well. Because again, if say married men were given priority in terms of democracy, that would really prioritize that family structure, especially as, you know, when men get married, they tend to have more responsibility, they tend to think more. But then in order for men to get married, we have to incentivize, you know, men to get married, meaning that we have to incentivize women to be good wives, which is where we need to get rid of feminism and really go back to that whole thing of like,
If
you know,
women don't have sex with men, then they would have to marry us in order to have sex with us.
sure, I mean, that's another debatable topic, isn't it?
Yes. But I mean, you know, the thing is, they have to take us as we come. You know, if you want to be virgin brides, they'll have to, you know, raise their standards. If we're going to be sluts, they'll also have to take us as we come. So, you know, it's up to us to decide whether we want to be married mothers or be, you know, single women or, you know, unmarried mothers. We can decide and we can lead, and you know, voting actually doesn't even come into it, because imagine if collectively women just decided, right, we're not going to have sex with them until we have that ring on our finger. What are they going to do to us? I mean, you know,
Well, men
they'd
can
be
force you to
helpless.
have sex, so that's not always the best plan.
Well, what did you say? Sorry, I didn't quite
I said
catch
men
what
can
you.
force you to have sex against your will, so I
Well,
don't know if
that's the
that's
thing. I mean,
No, but not
I've
generally.
heard,
I don't know.
the thing is, I've actually heard a man think aloud and said, I wonder if it'd be possible to for men to have a society in which it is possible to legally rape women. And I thought, probably not, because men will be, you know, fond of their mothers and their wives and their, you know, girlfriends and their daughters, and they wouldn't
I
want
mean, that would work if everyone got
women to
married
be
at
randomly
18, then
raped.
that would work, I guess, yeah.
Okay,
But
so
I
now
think this
we're
is a dystopian society. But it's not possible for men to just go around randomly raping women. And so it is in our power as women to decide how we want to behave, and the men will have to follow and obey our
interesting. So
preference.
now we've got 3 minutes left. Can we have a roundup? Maybe we'll start with Claire and I'll speak last. We'll go around clockwise. So Claire, Zarina, then myself, as to how do we get better leaders? Go for it, Claire.
In my view, sexual morality is the basis of all other kinds of morality, because basically, marriage is a long-term enterprise, and if our law doesn't support it, people will just think, "Oh, I'm just going to have sex for, you know, one night. The next night, I'll find somebody else, and I will carry on like that. Who wants children? Who wants to pay for them? And that will, in the end, cause chaos and criminality, because people just won't think in the long term. But if we think in the long term and think, well, I want descendants, I don't want my descendants to think I'm stupid, and made everything go wrong and refused to correct it, and I care about what people I will never meet think of me in the future, then maybe we might have some hope. But if we think, oh, nothing I try is ever going to work, we're just going to just do the wrong thing, even though we know the right thing can be done, because because collectively we can't organize, because there is no hierarchy. And things will go from bad to worse. And I think it is actually very easily fixed, but people are just not understanding it, or maybe it's not being communicated properly.
Interesting. So everything starts with sexual morality. Interesting. Serena?
I mean, I think, as I said, I think Claire's view of sexual morality is very cold and very unintimate and uncompassionate view of sex. It kind of turns sex into this like bargaining chip. But regarding no sex outside of marriage, I think that would work if people got married at 16. Then I actually think that would make a lot of sense, because yes, if it was the standard where, you know, everybody get married at 16 and you only have sex on your wedding night, okay, fine. But, you know, that would not work if people are going to get married in their 20s or 30s. I mean, you know, we've discussed that on streams as well about arranged marriage and such and such. Yeah, I guess really, again, a lot of it comes back to understanding gender roles and understanding, you know, the natural dynamics between men and women and the way in which people function. I think ultimately as well, you know, to have good leaders, you have to have good structures. And, you know, you're not going to have good structures when you do have a very anything goes, very overly laissez-faire system. Just as you're not going to have good systems when you have a totalitarian fascist state. You know, it's all about finding the correct stable balance, and I think that that's ultimately what brings a good, you know, structure and balance to West and so on and so forth.
Cool. Yeah, so listening to everybody, both of you here, made me realize or think about explaining how to fix society in two ways. So first of all, we talked about morality is essential for a society where we have good enough people to vote. For example, if we have morality enough to care about marriage, and then promote people who are married as the only people who can vote, stuff like that. I think that's a great idea. But also, there's only so much government can do to make countries work. So if you're not married, it is true statistically that your children will more likely be criminals, because if it takes two to make a child, it takes two to take care of one, right? And statistically, we know that if you don't have fathers at home, the boys tend to become more criminal, and even fathers also have an effect on their daughters as well, making them grow up properly as well. So there's all sorts of psychological data coming about that. So I think I would bring it back to, you need morality, you need good people for society to function. Otherwise it collapses. People don't have rules to stand by. There's just chaos. And also on top of that, we can't just blame our leaders. Where did our leaders come from? How comes we can't vote for better leaders if we're all so wonderful? Why can't we pick one of the wonderful people among ourselves? And I would bring it back to, again, we are far more corrupt than we would like to believe. And very basic signs of that is that we are not even in London. People don't even know their neighbors, and people are really lonely despite being surrounded by millions of people. So thank you very much, Claire and Zarina. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Really lots of thoughtful ideas, and really appreciate it. And thank you if anybody listening. Thank you for listening, and I hope
John Vance has one post which you may wish to comment on.
A new one besides? Okay, let me see on the bottom. Maybe, who knows? Is there? Okay, here we go. Everyone wants to blame men, but both parties are equally responsible. I don't think we were blaming men, actually. I don't think, and in this discussion, I don't think we were.
I don't think he was implying that we're blaming men. I think he's just commenting on the fact that everyone is currently blaming men, which is because of feminism.
Yeah, maybe. There are always groups of people.
We're very, very much on men's side, I think.
Yeah, there's lots of people blaming women, blaming men, and I don't think the blame game works. We need to fix ourselves. We need to fix society. We need to bring people along with us, because if we just blame everybody, then we won't be a society. It's like,
Blame the Muslims, blame the whites, blame the blacks, blame the Jews.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. All
Blame
right.
the
So,
rules.
sorry, say that again, Claire.
Blame the rules because the rules are wrong. So we
Yeah.
change them.
Yeah, and hopefully, as we become better people, we might want to change the rules. But if we don't, if we like the rules being the way they are, where people can misbehave as much as they want, then that won't change. I suppose it comes back to better society that wants better rules. All right, thank you so much for your time, everybody. I hope people will learn. Hope people will. If there's one takeaway, is that I want people to have a more of a sense of responsibility rather than blaming the world. Maybe change yourself. All right, thank you very much.